Well, a few weeks ago, I was picking up my kids from school, and the bell rang. I was talking to some parents out in the lot, just kind of waiting for the kids to come out. And my son Brennan, he actually is one of the first ones to come out, and which is typical. And so he actually throws his backpack at me. He goes plays on the playground with his friends while he knows, we got to wait for his sister Jalen to come out. So I'm talking with some parents, and then I noticed time just started to kind of move on. Like we had 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I still haven't seen my daughter come out of school. And so I'm starting to get nervous. A lot of the parents leave with their kids, and I'm starting to wonder, hey, where's my daughter? Did she walk home? What's going on? And so I get really nervous. I actually grab my son from the playground and say, we got to go up to the front office and figure out where your sister is. Right when I grab him, she just comes waltzing right out the door, and she has a smile on her face. It's like nothing happened to her. It's like, Jalen, what took you so long? And she said, oh, Dad, sorry about that. I lost track of time because I lost my Harry Potter book and I had to find it, and I couldn't find it in my desk or my locker. I had to walk all the way down to the library. I left it there, and I had to get it. I can't go a whole weekend without Harry Potter, Dad. So, I had to go ahead and find that. It's like, oh, wow, okay. She just lost track of everything because her focus was on the book that she lost. And it's that type of focus that we're really looking at as we're going throughout this series called the lost cause. And that phrase, lost cause, in our culture today, generally refers to, hey, don't put any hope or effort into that one idea or that one person because there's really little chance of it succeeding. Like you could say, my hope for the Bears winning a Super Bowl this year, that's going to be a lost cause, but, we're looking at this phrase lost cause actually through the lens of God. And Jesus actually defined the lost cause like this when Jesus gave his purpose statement. And this purpose statement was, for the Son of Man, which is referring to Jesus, this is God personified, the Son of Man came, meaning here's my cause, the reason why I'm here. That cause is to seek and to save the lost. And that is his priority. And since it's his priority, this should become the priority of his followers as well. But he says, the reason why I'm here is to help those who are disconnected from me become reconnected to me and also reconnected to others who are following me. And he says, this is the purpose of why we're here. And this isn't a devaluing term, to call someone lost. For him, this is a term of high value. He says, this is the priority. Just like how my daughter, she lost her book. It was a high value for her. She couldn't wait to find the book and have that again. And so this is Jesus's priority and lost cause, or his way that we'll define it is this, is that it's God's never-ending pursuit of anyone who is lost, meaning God has cared for everyone all throughout history who is disconnected from him. He wants to go find them and reconnect them with him so that they can experience the life and the hope and the peace that he offers. And the way that he does this today is through you and through me, for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, where he invites us to join him on his lost cause. Now, the challenge for us is that we don't want to force our faith on anybody. Well, the good news is anyone who isn't following Jesus, they don't want us forcing our faith on them either, because no one wants to be forceful. I mean, that's not loving, that's not kind or caring. It turns people into projects, and we don't want to do that. But the good news is that we see from the example of Jesus that Jesus, he shared his hope and he helped seek after those who were lost in a way that was very loving, very kind, very personal, and also very natural. And those of us who are following Jesus, we've experienced this as well, because most of us, the reason why we are following Jesus is because someone came alongside of us and they treated us very loving, very kind, very welcoming, that the way that they treated us, it actually opened us up to following Jesus and to actually be reconnected with him. And so that's what we are doing throughout this series, is we are going on this journey to learn what it means to be a part of this lost cause and to help seek those who are lost, help them reconnect with God in a way that Jesus did. And there are 3 steps that we invited everyone to take throughout this series. The first step is this, is we just asked everyone to identify your one and to begin praying for them every day at 1 p.m. And by your one, we're actually just referring to some stories that Jesus told where he began to talk about this one lost coin and this one lost sheep. And it was this parallel for this idea of a lost person where he says, we're going on this journey to find the one who is lost. And for us, what that means is we identify one person outside of our family, because in our family it's a given. We want to help those in our family follow Jesus as well. But one person outside of our family that we're going to lovingly invest in and pray that maybe that one day God would use us to help them begin to understand what it means to follow Jesus and receive hope from him. And so that was the first step. The second step that we asked everyone to do was to take this step and join us for a Lost Cause training huddle. And the reason why we asked everyone to do this is that there are just some practices that Jesus began to just live out every day that we can follow his example and use that to begin to invest in and build a relationship with our one, especially now that we are in summer, and now summer is such a great time to be able to spend time with these individuals and to do these practices. And it's so cool to hear from so many of you who joined us for these training huddles, either in one of our locations or online. But if you miss those for whatever reason, you can actually catch up. And the way that you can catch up with those training huddles is going to our website. We actually have several short videos that you can watch that actually cover the similar content, so you can learn these practices and put them into practice as we are heading into summer right now. And then the third step that we're asking everyone to do is what we're going to be talking about today as we wrap up our series, A Lost Cause. And what we're going to talk about today is going to be very, very helpful for us as we see Jesus actually do this time and time and time again. And Jesus does this as his primary way to help those who are lost be found. It's not the only way, but it's his primary way. And for many of us, what this is going to do, this is going to challenge us. And this is going to stretch our faith in ways that maybe it hasn't been stretched before. But we're going to learn and see how this one act actually creates an incredible environment for those that we're investing in to allow them to be able to interact with Jesus in a way that they may be open to Jesus, because it's going to be done in a way that they feel welcome, they feel valued, and they feel safe. And it's in this type of environment that they might be open to receiving and checking out the hope of Jesus for themselves. And the really cool thing about this is it's done in a really fun way. It's often done over a meal or a drink. And so we see Jesus do this again and again. But one interaction that we're going to look at today is actually found in Luke chapter 19, where Jesus has this incredible interaction with a man named Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is a chief tax collector back then. We've talked about tax collectors throughout the series. They were considered to be the worst of the worst in their culture back then. In fact, in their Jewish community, they were known for collecting taxes, a higher amount than what they actually owed. They would keep some of it for themselves, and then they'd give the rest over to the Roman Empire. So they were viewed as traitors and thieves, and they were basically kicked out of their Jewish community because they were considered just so low morally. And we often might get numb to this fact about how tax collectors are viewed because we don't have tax collectors like this today. And so to kind of help us understand how they were viewed, I want you to just begin to ask yourself the question, well, who would you consider to be the worst of the worst? Morally speaking. They're at the bottom of that moral ladder for you. I mean, they've done something that you would maybe deem unforgivable. They may even be someone that you would consider unlovable. I mean, who is that person that you would draw up to your mind? I mean, this is probably the only time I'm going to ask you to think of someone and judge them in church. So, I mean, take advantage of that opportunity, but who is that person that comes to mind? I want you to keep that type of person in mind as you see this interaction with Zacchaeus, because this is how the community feels about Zacchaeus when they see Jesus interact with him. And here's how Luke begins to describe this interaction. He says he wanted to see who Jesus was. He's Zacchaeus. But because he was short, and we don't know if the text is actually referring to Zacchaeus being short or Jesus being short, but someone's short. Because he was short, he could not see over the crowd because the crowd is actually trying to keep Zacchaeus away from Jesus. And so Zacchaeus ran ahead. He climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, Jesus looked up to him and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." And the crowd hears Jesus say this and like, whoa, like, Jesus, do you know who you're inviting over? Like, if you're going to even acknowledge Zacchaeus, just tell him how bad he is, and all the bad things he's done, because that's what we've been telling him in any interaction, because he should be cut off from the rest of the community. But Jesus, you're inviting yourself over to his house? Like, what's up with that? Why would Jesus do something like that? And he's going to spend time with him at his house to have a meal and just hang out with him, which is just so against the grain for them back then, because for them, meals were seen as this huge deal. I mean, having a meal with someone and staying at someone's house today is a big deal, but back then it was this really, really huge deal, because when you spent time with someone having a meal with them, it referred to what they called back then these boundary markers, which is the social circles that they would hang in, and you would stay in your social circle and you wouldn't go outside of that. And so for you to have a meal with someone, you're actually telling others, hey, I'm associating myself with this person and they're associating themselves with me. And so Jesus inviting himself over to Zacchaeus' house is telling the whole crowd and community, hey, we're boys. And we're hanging out, and we want to spend this time together, and we just want to be together, which back then blew their mind, because they would see a Jewish leader like Jesus. They would have never have gone outside of their boundary marker to hang out with someone that they consider to be the worst of the worst, like a tax collector. And what that means for us is, if we would just go back to this idea of who would we consider to be the worst of the worst, and you drew up that person in your mind, I want you to imagine Jesus going over to their house or spending time with them, and they're sharing this great meal, or they're laughing together over a drink. What emotions does that stir up in you? Do you get angry, sad, confused, wondering why would Jesus do that? All of those emotions, this crowd that's seeing Jesus do this, they're feeling that. In fact, Luke tells us what happens next. He says, so Zacchaeus came down at once, and he welcomed Jesus gladly, which I just find so fascinating, that this tax collector, this worst of the worst, loves to be around this religious leader. I mean, he loves being around Jesus, even though Jesus is nothing like him, and Jesus likes being around him as well. And all the people in the crowd, they saw this, and they began to mutter or complain. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner. And they're confused, because they're thinking, hey, if Jesus is going to hang out with anybody, he should hang out with us, because we're more like him, not like this worst person, Zacchaeus. Why is he hanging out with him? And if Jesus is going to interact with Zacchaeus at all, he should just tell him about all of the bad things that he's done and guilt him about that. But Jesus has no interest in that. In fact, Jesus, by inviting himself over and spending time with Zacchaeus, he's telling Zacchaeus that Zacchaeus matters more to Jesus than what Zacchaeus has done for him. And Jesus also knows this, that no life change happens through this guilt and this condemnation, but Jesus knows the power of what happens in a meal. That when you have a meal with someone, it begins to build this trusting relationship. It begins to build this friendship. It opens someone up to having their heart being opened up to actually be shifting towards this life change. In fact, this is exactly what happens to Zacchaeus in this meal. Here's what happens to him. At one point in this meal, Zacchaeus stood up and he said to the Lord, hey, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I am going to pay back 4 times the amount. And Zacchaeus is beginning to experience this incredible heart change in just this one meal. In fact, Zacchaeus is calling Jesus Lord, which means master. So Zacchaeus, he's actually going out of his way to follow Jesus. And he's going from stealing from those in his community to now being generous towards those in need. And that phrase, paying back 4 times, that's not a small phrase. Because in their culture back then, their law would say that if you stole or broke a relationship with someone, you would pay back 4 times the amount, not for justice sake, but in order for that relationship to be restored. And so what Zacchaeus is doing is he's asking for forgiveness. He wants to be reconnected with God and reconnected with God's family. And he's asking for this, and we'd see that the lost is being found here, and this is happening just through a simple meal. In fact, Jesus, he's seeing his lost cause be fulfilled in this meal, and he celebrates this. And he says out loud, he says this to the crowd and to Zacchaeus. He says, well, today salvation has come to this house because the lost person in Zacchaeus has now been found. Because this man, Zacchaeus, is too a son of Abraham. And this statement is huge because the Jewish community, they've actually cut Zacchaeus off. They said, you are no longer a part of us. But in this phrase, Jesus is saying, no, you're reconnected to God's people who are all descendants of their forefather Abraham. In this statement, Jesus is saying, hey, Zacchaeus, you are again part of God's family. And then he comes back to his purpose statement, the statement that we looked at earlier. Here's where Jesus actually said this. He said this as a result of Zacchaeus. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That this was Jesus' priority, that anyone who is lost would be found. And I really, really appreciate John Mark Comer, who's a pastor and author, how he summarizes this passage and the importance of a meal. And here's what John Mark Comer says. He says, for Jesus, meals weren't a boundary marker, but rather a sign of God's great welcome, the welcome into the kingdom. Not a way to keep people out, but rather to invite people in. It was Jesus' primary way to help those who were lost become found. In fact, Jesus would actually do this again and again. The most significant thing about Zacchaeus' story is that it was not an exception to the rule. It was Jesus' rule of life. He would always spend meals and drinks with those who were far from him and use that as a way to reconnect them to him. In fact, the Jewish leaders back then, they were so jealous of Jesus' growing movement that they would look for anything that they could do to accuse Jesus and catch him in doing something so that people would stop following him. And so they were trying to catch him in traps again and again, but the one thing that they could accuse him of, the one thing that they could actually say is, hey, Jesus broke the boundary markers. He went outside of his circles so that he could actually spend time helping the lost be found. And Jesus was like, yeah, you're right. I'm owning that one. That's exactly what I did. In fact, earlier in the book of Luke, he said, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. And the first part of that phrase should actually sound familiar because it's like his purpose statement where the Son of Man came to seek the lost and help them become found. But that's his purpose statement. Here he says, this is how I'm doing it. I'm doing this by coming and eating and drinking. And yet you say, here's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And Jesus would say, yes, I am a friend of them because this is the way that I can fulfill the lost cause and help the lost be found. And what Jesus is doing here is he's actually going through this practice called hospitality. In our culture today, we may not have a full picture of what Jesus is doing as he's extending hospitality. Because hospitality that Jesus is doing is actually more than throwing a great party or being a great host, although that's a part of hospitality. But back in the culture then, they would define hospitality as this. It's simply the love and welcome of strangers. Meaning we're going to go outside of our boundary markers, outside of our close circle of close family members or close friends, but we're going to go out of our way to love and welcome those outside of our circle. For us today, that might mean, hey, we're going to go out of our way to welcome our neighbor across the street, although we haven't gotten a chance to know their name yet. Or we're going to go and love and welcome that coworker that just is down the hall from us that we haven't had much interaction with them. Or maybe it's at the sports league with the parent whose kid is on the same team as our kid, but we just haven't really talked yet. And we see that as an opportunity to go out of our way and to extend hospitality to them. In fact, a definition that I find really helpful about hospitality comes from Henry Nouwen, who's another pastor who wrote this many years ago. He said, hospitality is the creation of a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. And this is how we can use hospitality to love and welcome those outside of our social circle. Now, it's so important for us to understand that hospitality is very different than entertainment. Because some of us might hear hospitality and start thinking about all the reasons why we can't practice hospitality. Because we start thinking, well, I don't have a 4,000 square foot home that I can open up to everybody here. I'm not Martha Stewart. I can't cook all the great food. I can't, cook all the fine, all the fine meals. I don't have all the great conversation pieces in my house that everyone would love to talk about. I can't do all of that. And if that was the definition of hospitality, that's going to write a lot of us off, including myself. My small 1,000 square foot home, then I can't cook a whole lot of great food. It can't do a whole lot there. But this would also, if that was our view of hospitality, that would also write Jesus off, because he didn't have a permanent home. And so it's important to realize the difference between hospitality and entertaining others. A couple of the key differences is that entertainment is primarily, actually it's about exclusion. Because we invite those into our social circle, or those that we want to have in our social circle, if we want to move up in the social ladder, where we say, this is who I want to be with, and I'm going to exclude those outside of me so I can be with them. And the way that we do this is we work to perform for them. And we want to serve them well by cooking them all the great meals or showing off how much stuff we have. And we do this out of a way of trying to show off how good we are, so that they can accept us. It's through this lens of performance. And the reason why we do this is we're hoping for some form of reciprocity, where if I do this for them, maybe they'll invite me over and they can do this for me. And that's the circle that happens with entertaining. But hospitality is very different than this. Hospitality is actually all about inclusion, where we go outside of our social circle, where it's not about moving up the social ladder, but maybe it's even going down in the social ladder to include those outside of our boundary markers or our circle. And we do this in a way that serves them, where we go to add value and we seek to help them and add value in any way that we can. And we don't do this so we get anything out of it. We do this because we want to be generous so that we can help them. And then ultimately, we do this as a way that we can join Jesus in his lost cause. We can show them the hope and life and love that Jesus offers to us. And so when we read about Jesus, we see him do this again as a way to fulfill his lost cause, to help the lost be found. And then he told his followers, he's like, I want you to do the exact same thing. And the early church, this was what they were known for practicing hospitality. In fact, some of the early church leaders, they encouraged their churches and their followers to keep this up. Paul, he wrote to a letter that he was writing to the church in Rome. He said, here's what I want you to do. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, be generous, and then practice hospitality. And that word for practice is this idea of strive for it. Like if you're running, imagine that you're sprinting so hard. Or if you're lifting weights, it's like that pulling that really heavy 1 max rep weight. Pull really, really hard. We want to practice hospitality in this way, where we want to strive to do it well. And then Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, he wrote to other followers of Jesus. He said this, he said, offer hospitality to one another, and he adds this caveat, without grumbling. That's all for the introverts like myself. No, we're all in this. We all are invited to participate in this, even if we're like, I need my alone time and my house time, to recharge. Recharge, but use it as an opportunity to practice hospitality. Because here's what we see. The early church, they heard these instructions and they went with it. And they were known for their hospitality. And this movement of Jesus followers, it grew rapidly in 300 years. Where it started from the small handful of people who were following Jesus to actually going and practicing hospitality to being over half of the Roman Empire in just a few hundred short years. And what's important to realize is they didn't have buildings to meet in. They didn't have mass forms of communication like the internet. They didn't have government protections. In fact, the Roman Empire was persecuting them. They wanted to stop this movement because they were afraid of people leaving and turning from the Roman gods. But yet, more and more people jumped in this movement early on. And the reason why they jumped in and started following Jesus is because they were welcomed, they were loved, and they were served. And this movement, it kept growing one dinner table, one meal at a time. And it continued to grow. And over the years, we started seeing the creation of things that we just know and see on a regular basis. We saw hospitals be created. We saw hostels being created, all by the first followers of Jesus. And notice in the root word of those words is hospitality. It's the love and welcome of strangers. And what happened was these followers of Jesus, as they began to love and welcome and share meals with others, they began to discover how they can serve them better. And they realized that there needed to be a place to help serve the sick. There needed to be a place to help travelers feel safe while they were on their travels. And what happened is that these followers of Jesus, they were known for their hospitality. And because they were loving and welcoming and serving others so well, more and more people who were lost were being found, and this movement just continued to grow. And we can't help but wonder if right now we have an opportunity as followers of Jesus to become known for our hospitality, just like the early church was known for their hospitality. John Mark Comer, he writes about it like this. He said, hey, picture this. If there was ever a time to rediscover our ancient heritage of radically ordinary hospitality, and yes, that phrase is intentional, because it goes against the grain of what our culture does, but it's so simple, but so effective. In fact, here's how effective it is. It's now, in our time of widespread loneliness, political polarization, and as we pick up the pieces from a global pandemic, digital civil war, and year plus of social distancing, practicing hospitality can be the practice that can bring healing to so much hurt that we are feeling in our community today. I mean, if we're known for this could end the loneliness epidemic as we know it. This could be the thing that if we do this to actually begin to share Jesus' love to those who are lost, here's what can happen. It can free people from their anxiety because only Jesus can free from their anxiety. We can be known to help the lost be found and find life in Jesus just through this simple act. And so, as we begin to wrap up this series, Lost Cause, this is the third thing that we can do to take this step with Jesus to help those who are lost be found, is we just practice hospitality. And so the step that I want to encourage you to take this week, and just get started with it this week, is to actually invite one person over who isn't a follower of Jesus, invite them over for a meal. And for some of us, this might be like, oh, this is going to be really hard because how do I do this? You know, how do I invite them over? And what do we talk about if they actually say yes? Like, do I bring Jesus up right away? You know, like, hey, you know, Jesus gave you this meal. Like, no, don't. You know, the goal isn't to bring up Jesus right away. I mean, if Jesus comes up naturally in the conversation, great. But the goal is just to welcome them, serve them, and begin to build a relationship with them. And this one person, we want to go outside of our boundary markers again. So we want to go outside of our family, outside of our close circle of friends, and invite this person over. It could be a neighbor. It could be someone at work. It could be someone that we get to bump into at the gym. But the goal is just to begin to build this relationship with them. Now, you might be like, oh, man, but I don't cook. You know, what do I do then? That's okay. Invite them over to a restaurant or coffee shop or a bar. If you don't cook, maybe you can invite them over for a drink. If you're wondering, well, what do I talk about when we hang out together? We have some resources that can help you with some conversation starters on different things that you can talk about, and I'll share in a moment how you can actually get that resource. But use this as an opportunity to begin to welcome and serve someone outside of your circle. Now, if you have done this, and if you've experienced the benefits of this, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go one more. And the reason why I want you to go one more is because this allows us to have more interactions with more people to help them begin to interact with the love of Jesus. And so going one more for you might look like this. If you do this one time a month, do it twice a month. If you do this once a week, pick a week in the month where you do this twice that week, because this allows us more opportunities for us to be known for our hospitality and how we can serve others. And here's the great opportunity we have with this summer. As we're heading right into summer, more people are out. We can really use this as an opportunity to start changing our community for the better just through the simple act of hospitality. Here's what I mean by that. Over this week, there's probably going to be about 2,000 individuals who are going to hear this challenge to practice hospitality. And we know that through all of our services online, all of our locations. There will be about 2,000 of us who are followers of Jesus that can take on this challenge to practice hospitality. And when we take on this challenge, here's what we can do. If we say, hey, we can do this one time a month for the next 3 months over summer, guess how many people could actually be helped through the practice of hospitality? Well over 5,000 individuals. I mean, 5,000 people welcomed, served, loved. That can change our community right there. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take this challenge and be a part of these 5,000 acts of hospitality this summer. And the way that you can do that is if you would take out your phone and just actually text the word LOST to this phone number, 414-509-0339. When you text the word LOST to that phone number, here's what's going to happen. You are going to actually get a text back with some resources about how you can do this with different ideas and with different conversation starters that you can practice with. And then when you do this, you are letting us know that you are in and you're committing to be about these 5,000 acts of hospitality. So I want you to take out your phone and commit to being a part of this. Now, you might see that word and the phone number over a picture of a dirty backyard and think, hey, what mistake was that? Why did they pull up that picture? What's going on there? Well, that's no mistake. That's actually a picture of my backyard. And and the reason why I wanted to show a picture of my backyard is about 5 years ago, my wife and I, we were able to move in our house, and we were very blessed to be able to do so. But we confused hospitality with entertainment about 5 years ago. When we would hear a message like this, we would start kind of like excusing things away. We would say, yeah, our home isn't really host-worthy, though. We got a 1,000-square-foot home, small living room, small kitchen. No one really wants to hang out here, so we wouldn't really be able to do this. But we heard a challenge similar to this, and we said, okay, let's try this out. Let's try this out by just inviting people over into our backyard. And so we started inviting some neighbors over and some people that we've gotten to know from our kids' school over. And here's what we began to see happen in our backyard over the last few years. So I've invited some guys over and had some drinks over a fire pit back there. I've had guys, they began to admit to insecurities they've never told anyone else. And they were starting to open up and be curious about who Jesus was. My wife has invited moms and their kids over to play, and the kids would actually go onto the play set that my father-in-law and I built. And so, you talk about prayer in the backyard right there. We're praying, that the play set holds together as kids are jumping up and down on that. But as the kids are playing, my wife's talking to these moms, and the moms are just talking about the insecurities that they're facing and the questions they have. And she said it's led to some significant spiritual conversations right there in our backyard. We've invited couples over who were engaged, and they're starting to explore steps to get married. We've seen couples actually open up the Bible for the very first time in our backyard, and then eventually also in our living room as well. And we're just seeing God move. As we're just taking the step and taking the challenge, just like anyone else, that's here. We're like, God, we don't know what we're doing fully, but God, we trust that you're going to show up and move as we invite and welcome and serve however we can. And as we've done this, here's been the really cool thing for my wife and I. Our faith has grown. As we've taken steps to do this, as we've taken these risks to invite people over and serve them. In fact, our marriage has gotten stronger as a result of this because we see we have this purpose together to invest and welcome those in our neighborhood as we invite them over and get to know them. And it's been so cool for us, and it's been really cool. And I think and I hope and pray that it's been really helpful for those that we've been able to serve in our backyard. And that's what I want for you. I want for you to be able to experience a God move in you and God move through you in this way, where you can just invite someone over and you welcome and serve them over a meal or a drink as you practice hospitality. So go ahead, commit to doing this. Let's be a part of the 5,000 acts together. Text the word LOST to that phone number and say, I'm in. And let's serve and welcome our neighbors, our friends, our coworkers this summer as we have this opportunity to join Jesus in this lost cause and to help anyone who is lost become found. Hey, as we're committing to do this, let me pray for us together. And that is, God, we are so grateful that you have determined that we are valuable enough for you to send your son Jesus to come here and to seek after us and to help us be found and to reconnect with you, to find a life that is worth living in you. God, to experience the peace and the hope that you offer. And God, we are so grateful for the people that you brought into our lives who have helped us experience you. And so God, we thank you, God, for moving in that way. And God, we know that you want to do that even more. And so God, we pray, God, for those that we're going to do this with, that we're going to extend an invite over into our home, to our backyards, to our driveways, over for a meal or for a drink. God, whatever that might be, God, I pray that you would move in them. And God, as we go out of our way to serve them and welcome them, I pray, God, that they would see you move through them. I pray, Jesus, that they would feel welcomed by you, loved by you. And God, maybe that you would even open up their heart, God, to see you. God, how many stories of Zacchaeus could we have in this community this summer when we take this step to just say, hey, I'm going to invite you over for a meal or a drink? God, we want to do that. We want to participate with you and partner with you in this journey of this lost cause because, God, we can't wait to celebrate so many stories of so many people finding life in you. And we thank you for the life that you've given us in your son, Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.